Welcome back to the channel. We've got something special today, a new project debut. This thing is pretty rare and pretty cool. Let's check it out. That's right, it's an Audi, but an Audi you probably haven't seen either ever or for a very long time, especially in the United States. This is a 1987 Audi 5000 CS Quattro Turbo. Just feast your eyes on this bit of pure 80s nostalgia. This thing has all of the specs out of the 80s technological playbook. It has an inline 5-cylinder turbocharged engine, a manual 5-speed transmission. It has the Quattro all-wheel drive system. It has electric windows. It had pneumatic power locks. And this is conceptually very similar to the Group B rally cars that Audi was campaigning during this era. And that sort of technology trickled down to the production cars. Now, these things are extremely rare nowadays in the United States. I can't even remember the last time I saw one. I'm pretty sure someone had one in my neighborhood growing up. And I remember thinking it was pretty cool. It kind of fit that 80s German vibe really well. But ever since then, I don't think I've seen another one. Not on the road, not even really ever featured in magazines, or you don't see them on social media or anything. I mean, they're just very rare vehicles. And there's a reason, I believe, for that, especially in the United States. Now, how I came upon this particular example is interesting. It actually was a viewer of the channel, a local viewer of the channel, who had seen a lot of my videos, and he'd had this car for a little while, and it's been needing some upkeep, a little bit of restoration. It's still actually in quite good condition, but he decided he wasn't willing to kind of take on the little repairs here and there. So he reached out to me. He said, I think this might be a vehicle you're interested in, and how right he was. Very kind gentleman, really into motorcycles, has an awesome selection of motorcycles, so we kind of hit it off talking about track days and Ducatis and all that good stuff. But this car really was the topic of discussion, and once I saw it, I knew that I had to come home with me. We were able to agree on a very reasonable price, something that made me feel comfortable, taking it on as a project, because it does have quite a few things that need sorted out. So one of the reasons I'm very excited about this car, more so than any project I've had in recent past, is because this is really one that kind of fits the bill of the channel. This is really an affordable classic, truly interesting, has unique technology within it that really isn't shared amongst other cars that you see throughout your daily commute or anything like that. It's just really unique, and I can't wait to start digging into this. We see all the details about the car and figure out ways to repair them and keep them on the road. Now, this car was quite a focus point in pop culture during the mid to late 80s, and some of it was good, and unfortunately a lot of it was bad. And it's the bad why you don't typically see many of these anymore, and let's talk about that first. So it was around 1983 when American buyers of this car started reporting unintended acceleration. And anytime you hear of unintended acceleration for any particular car, it typically means that the drivers probably shouldn't have a driver's license and have no business behind the wheel, because more often than not, there's not actually something wrong with the car. And that was the case with the Audi 5000. However, the damage was done, because 60 Minutes did an entire episode over how this car apparently had some sort of undiagnosed, unwanted, or unintended acceleration problem, when really it was just the drivers that were inexperienced with how Audi designed the pedals on the car. It all came down to the brake pedal being too close, apparently, to the gas pedal, and people were hitting the gas instead of the brake. But unfortunately, the bad publicity from the 60 Minutes feature that basically threw Audi under the bus caused irreparable damage throughout the industry, and it made the values on the cars just tank. I mean, I think dealers had a lot of issues actually selling these cars, especially after that 60 Minutes episode ran. The value of the cars was just halved very quickly. And so what that means is, if you ever gotten in a fender bender or anything with this car, insurance would very quickly total it out. It just wasn't worth repairing. So many of these have met their demise in the junkyards for probably issues that were easily fixable. This one somehow made it out unscathed. It was originally purchased in the Kansas City area, so it is a local car, and it has absolutely no rust. The body was completely galvanized steel, so it didn't rust. And this car is testament to that. There are few places worse than the Midwest to own a car, especially a classic car, because they put down road salt and they just rust out so quickly. But this car is holding up very well. This is just a testament to the build quality that the German Audi manufacturers used to have in place. An example of that is just listening to the doors shut. I mean, you cannot get a car today that makes this sort of shut noise. It's just bank vault type. I love it. Even the rear doors. It's incredible how the interior has held up pretty well as well. It's got leather interior. It just needs a good cleaning up, and I think it'll really shine. Even has leather on the door cards. Electric windows. Some of the faults can be viewed from inside of here. So again, we have a manual transmission. Unfortunately, it has an aftermarket radio, but I've heard that the original radios just didn't last very long. Something with the ignition system no longer works, so that when you turn the key, it won't crank the starter. So we've got a bypass starting switch right here. I'm going to find out a way to get this working again and get rid of this bypass switch. It's got an old school radar detector there that I don't believe works. The odometer actually works, and it only has 164,000 miles, which is impressive. An overall minimum wear and tear on the inside of this car. The headliner's got some sagging parts that I can fix up. Some cracks in the dashboard, but nothing too crazy. And under the hood lives the 2.2 liter inline 5-cylinder turbocharged engine, which is good in stock output, around 162 horsepower, which isn't too bad for the time period. And I've kind of done a cursory look over of this engine bay, and everything looks pretty well sorted. The steering racks are a known failure point on these. In fact, very common failure point, and this one has a torn boot, so we may have to get in there and replace that. You have to use a special mineral oil for the power steering system. You can't use automatic transmission fluid, or else it will blow out that rack prematurely. The air conditioning actually works on the car. Just shocking. It's kind of neat to see the radiator offset to the side here, because there's simply no room to fit it in front of the engine. Just look at how close that is to this front support. And you have your intercooler right in there. And if you look at the axle, the front axle is right here. The entire engine is in front of the front axle. So I imagine if you get this out into some adverse conditions like snow, you'll definitely feel the front end push, because that is an iron block engine, aluminum head, but iron block, so it is no lightweight engine. Transmission shifts incredibly smooth for the mileage and age, and the clutch bites really well. It's a very heavy pedal effort, but I actually kind of prefer that, honestly. Brakes work well. Honestly, the car is fully functional. It just needs cleaned up and a little bit of mechanical sympathy spread throughout. Even this cover is in good shape. So we have glass headlights on the front, and unfortunately the right side one has let quite a lot of water in here. We've got a little makeshift aquarium going on in there. And I've looked around, and unfortunately there are some used ones out there, but they're about $200 a pop. So I'm gonna see if I can't disassemble this, recoat the inside, clean it out, and reseal it up so we can restore instead of replace. That's kind of the idea behind this car, for as much as we can anyway, to keep the part spend low. One of the known issues, at least inside of here, other than the steering rack, is the water pump. It's believed to be leaking. Topping up the coolant reservoir basically leaks everything you put in the coolant reservoir out, what appears to be coming out from the water pump. So I'll be going in here. It is a timing belt engine, so I'll have to replace the timing belt, and I'll do the water pump while I'm there. I'll probably replace the spark plugs, because I believe it has the wrong ones in there. Power seats. This thing is fully decked out for the time period. I love those headrests. They look really nice. Very stylish. The door cards feel really tight, no flimsiness throughout here. It's definitely a heavy feeling car. which benefits the entire driving experience of it. Has disc brakes all the way around, and it's just incredible how it's rust-free everywhere. Right now it has some winter tires on there, which is not great for the summertime, which we're in the middle of right now. So I'm going to replace these with some more all-season style tires. It should help the road manners and general performance throughout the year. These do seem to be flat spotted. On the highway you get some vibration, and I think it's just down to the tires being kind of old. This is a really cool kind of Easter egg. So the rear defroster has Quattro in the actual element. So if you ever had ice on here and you turn on the rear defroster, you'd see Quattro spelled out. I love that Quattro font. It's so retro and cool. This has got to be the longest badging in history. The whole thing spelled out right there. This is kind of interesting. The trunk lid is sprung by these garage door spring looking things. We have an extra set of floor mats in here. We have the original spare tire in here. There's the jack in there and everything. So another issue that will have to be sorted is starting the car. So obviously we have this ignition bypass switch right there. That'll be something we have to take on. But secondarily is it takes a while to actually turn the engine over. And I believe it has to do something with the fuel priming. It's not holding fuel pressure when you turn it off. So if we just kind of try to turn it over. Just takes a few seconds. Obviously the accessory belts need to be tightened up or replaced. There we go. And it's kind of lumpy after you first start it, and it clears up, and it makes me think there's just bleeding out the air in the fuel line. So this does have mechanical fuel injection. So it's got to bleed out all the air in each one of those injector lines. We've got a coolant low light on there. Surprisingly, it stays cool, so it has enough coolant in the system to actually operate and stay within range, but there's no extra, so that'll be something we have to address for sure. Fuel gauge works well, and based on the onboard computer, which is this neat little rocker switch right here, you can actually see the miles per gallon readout. And I drove it back on the highway for about 100 miles, and I averaged, according to the computer, 29 miles per gallon, which is shocking for a car that weighs 3,500 pounds and is from the 80s. But I'll take it. The HVAC control unit looks a little bit out of place with the rest of the design language inside of the car, and I believe that's because this unit was actually designed by GM and put into Cadillacs. I guess Audi figured someone had already perfected this kind of unit, and they decided to slap it in these 5000s. I have to say it works really well. Again, the AC does actually work. However, I don't think the heat works. I haven't tried it yet just because it's so hot outside, but it's possible that the heater core will need replaced because it's clogged. Someone put some stop leak in the system, so we'll have to go through and address that as well. So let's just take it on a quick drive here in the parking lot. Shifts so well. The steering is very, very heavy on it, and that's all right. It kind of gives a lot of good feedback through the wheel. The car does have a boost gauge on it on board here in the trip computer. So right there, we're at 0.3 bar. You can see it goes up to 0.6 bar, and it's pretty neat. A lot of cool technology for the 80s. It also has heated seats, although I don't think they function. We might look into that. So I haven't yet gotten under the car to inspect it, and I'd like to do that next so I can start figuring out all of the issues I need to address first and start ordering some parts. So what do you say we get this thing up in the air and start poking around? Alright, so I got the car back to the garage and up on jack stands and started poking around, seeing what I could find, and I've uncovered quite a bit. So let's start with the front suspension. So here on the right side, you give the wheel a wiggle. You can see that there's a bit of play here in the tie rod end, so you get some clunking from the front suspension definitely through that. And if we look up here, we can see that this strut is leaking pretty badly, so that could probably use being replaced. If we look at the front brakes, we can see that these rotors are heavily grooved. I mean, I would say there's a good 1/8 of an inch missing from both faces. The pads are definitely looking close to being done. So just as a safety measure, it'd be best to replace the brakes on this. And then lastly, the CV boots on the outer portion. This is both axles are both split. I will have to pull those out and put new boots and fresh grease in there. The inner ones appear to be fine. Now moving to the driver's side front, we can see that we still have the same tie rod play, and then also this one has some what appears to be wheel bearing play. Still has the same wear on the brake rotors and still has leaky struts. Now moving on to the back of the car, one of the big critical issues is that the emergency brake or the parking brake doesn't work at all. The lever seems to be seized in place, and now that we can see the parking brake cables, we can see why that's the case. These are kinked and rusted, so there's nothing to be repaired here other than just replacing them. So that's probably one of the first things I'm going to attend to, just because my driveway is heavily sloped and I can't park the car on it without securing the parking brake. I don't like just leaving it in gear and relying on the engine's compression to hold the car in place. So those are going to be the first things to go. Both sides look about the same, so that's kind of a safety thing. The rear brakes look better than the front, but I probably will replace these anyways. They're somewhat grooved as well. And then I saw something kind of strange with this rear shock right here. The spring, in fact, is out of its perch up here. I don't know how this happened. The shock itself doesn't appear to be leaking, so that's good to go. But this spring, I'm going to see if I can't compress this and kind of slide it back into where it should be. I don't know how it came out like that. The other side does not look like that, so not sure what happened. Next, here on the right side of the car and by the rear axle, we have the fuel accumulator right here, which is kind of like a fuel pressure regulator on a normal like electronic injection car. And I believe by replacing this, I will solve the hard to start issue, the long cranking issue this car is ailed with, because really this should hold fuel pressure when you turn the ignition off, and the symptoms are purely that is not happening. You're basically asking the fuel pump to fully prime the fuel system and prime the injectors every time you start the car. So that would be a good thing to replace and should improve usability of this car. Looking at the underside of the car on the back end, we can see everything looks pretty good. There's some seepage coming from some of the gaskets, but I mean, the car's 35 years old. I'm not concerned with that. Really, the only thing to deal with back here are just those e-brake cables. The bushings have some tears in them, but they still are together enough to allow the car to handle decently. The CV boots on these axles look fine, and the exhaust system looks relatively fine. That is, except for the rearmost muffler box. However, the fact that it's missing doesn't actually make the car loud, and that's because there's enough mufflers and catalytic converters upstream of that box that really it's not loud and it's completely drivable. So I'll probably leave that alone for right now until I can find a suitable exhaust that looks cosmetically appropriate from the external view. Now moving to the front of the car, we can see that there are various gaskets seeping but nothing to be of great concern. I can't see where the coolant was leaking from, so I'm just going to assume it's the water pump at this point. So I'll go in there and change the timing belt and water pump and all of that. I did notice this wire hanging from the starter, and I assume this should be connected should the ignition switch and all that system actually be operational, but of course it's been bypassed with that switch on the dashboard, and that is taking the place of where I think this used to be connected. So I'll have to figure out what went wrong and how to make this particular wire work again, and so we can get rid of that bypass switch. If we look at the front suspension, it employs a very interesting design. It's a McPherson strut style suspension, but the fore and aft movement of the front suspension is located by the sway bar. It's not a control arm, it's a sway bar. So that is unique. I don't know how effective it is. Obviously it's effective enough. Yeah, I've never seen anything like that before. If we look up here, we can see that the alternator is cooled by this little bellows and vent on the front of the bumper. Then our AC compressor, it looks like some dye has leaked out here, so I don't know, it blows cold. It doesn't seem to be leaking all that badly, but by that dye being there means that something is leaking a little bit. So it is still an R12 refrigerant, I believe, so I may have to find a way to top that up. While I'm down here, I'll likely tighten up these belts. The AC compressor belt's nice and tight, but the alternator belt is quite loose, and same with the power steering belt. So looking at the middle underside of the vehicle, we can see that the output shaft on the transmission, or rather the output shaft maybe on the center differential, is leaking a decent amount. That might be something I have to look into. That will require pulling the exhaust down, pulling the drive shaft off at the very least to get to that seal. Alright, so this was a little bit on the sketch train, but I was able to put one of the spring compressors on here and use some silicone spray and a pry bar to kind of push it back into the seat. So now I just need to relieve the tension on this, and hopefully it will reseat itself. There we are. I'm not sure if that will stay or not. Looks like this top part is a little bit ripped and didn't really seat properly, so it probably will slip back out. We'll just have to see. But I tried. Alright, so that's a new project. Those are the major issues. I'm sure we'll find more as we start going through it. But it's a good starting point, and I'll start ordering some parts. So, as always, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you guys again next time.